she took what he meant for just to be for their relationship, she took it and turned it into a movement,
Right,
into
right.
the Harlem Renaissance.
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks To, where our guest today is Victoria Christopher Murray, and we're going to be talking about her latest book, Harlem Rhapsody, which is a Book Reporter Bets On selection. I absolutely loved this
Oh,
book.
thank you.
I listened to it on audio, and I was completely captured by the entire performance, and we'll get into talking about the audio. Right now, I want to talk about our Book Reporter review, where Philip Zosario says, Harlem Rhapsody is an outstanding historical novel that explores love, literature, and the civil rights push in the 1920s. Victoria Christopher Murray, who is known for her collaborations with fellow best-selling author Marie Benedict, has written a smart, pensive, and entertaining novel that is impossible to put down. Her appreciation of literature and history is demonstrated throughout this superb novel. So I thought that was like
Oh,
wonderful.
such a nice thing. That's a wonderful review. And it's from a gentleman,
It's from
right?
a gentleman. I actually pronounced his name wrong. It's Zozaro. And I have to tell you,
Oh, I love it.
we reviewed it a couple of weeks ago, and the book came out earlier in the year, and he picked it up, wanted to read it. I was dying to get a review, and when I read the review, it made me even more want to get to the book. And I said, you know what? I'm going to try this on audio because Penguin Random House does a great job of getting the audios to me. And I was just like, oh, this is going to be great. This is like, exactly what I want to be doing. So, welcome to you. It's been a while since I've seen you. I guess you've been very busy.
I know. Yes, I've been a little bit busy. And you said you should have read this when it first came out. It hasn't been out that long, Carol. It has not been out that long.
Well, I always feel like,
Three
oh,
months.
I should be reading it when it first, and you know what? I've decided I'm going to have less guilt because readers are still
Yes.
discovering a book, and so much emphasis
Yes.
is put on the first couple of weeks. And I'm realizing if I still want to read it, I'm going to go read it. If I'm going to pick it as a bets on later than we would normally do, I don't really care. That's what I'm going to do.
And I'm so glad you're picking it now because, I'm still on the road and still, so I'm glad it's a pick for you now
Yeah.
and it'll give you another level of new life to this book. So thank you. Thank you for
Oh,
having me back.
so much fun. So let's have you share an overview of Harlem Rhapsody. What drew you to the book? Let's just get an overview of the book because it's a very, very interesting topic.
It really is. Well, Harlem Rhapsody is about a woman by the name of Jessie Redmon Fauset. And she was a woman of first. She was the first Black young girl to graduate from the Philadelphia High School for Girls. She was the first Black woman to graduate from Cornell University. She was the first Black woman to graduate Phi Beta Kappa. And what becomes important in this book is she was the very first literary editor for the Crisis magazine, which was the preeminent magazine for the NAACPs. It was their magazine to let the world know, or at least the country know, what was happening in the Black community in the 1920s. And she became the first and only literary editor for the magazine. Now, I did not know anything about Jessie Redmon Fauset when I decided to write my first solo novel. I was looking for a time period that I wanted to write about. And I'm very attracted to the 20s and the 60s
Uh-huh.
for the same reasons.
Mhm.
As a writer, I want my writing to stand out and for it to be a distinctive time. And so the 20s and the 60s, you think about the fashion, the music, what was going on in the world, but the very same things. You also think about the culture and the political climate. Again, it was the rise of Black pride during those 2 decades for very different reasons. And so I was looking for a story in either one of those times. Those are the only two periods that really, really interest me. And I thought about the 20s and I thought about New York. I'm from New York. So I wanted to see what was happening in New York in the 20s. And I bumped into the Harlem Renaissance. Like I bumped into it. I wish I could tell you that I had some intellectual way that I came up with this. No, I kind of bumped into it that way. And it made sense because I'm a writer. And I said, oh, Harlem Rhapsody, that would be, I didn't have a title. Harlem Renaissance would be a perfect thing for me as a writer to write about. But what I didn't know was that when you say the word Harlem Renaissance, there should be one face that comes to your mind, and it should be Jessie Redmon Fauset. Right now, the face that comes to people's minds is Langston Hughes, because he was such a formidable poet, and County Cullen, and Nella Larson, and Jean Toomer. But none of those people would be the literary legends that we know them to be now without Jessie Redmon Fauset.
She cultivated so much culture. She brought along so many people, featuring them, working with them on their words, appreciating their work. And it was sort of, she was shepherding people. At the same time, she was building her own career. She was doing both simultaneously. It was so interesting.
Yes.
It was such a wonderful time for culture and the arts. I confess to not knowing much about it. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I don't know how I missed this, but I did not know much.
And that's fine.
And it's like, had you been raised with a deep knowledge, or was it something you came to later? Because I'm, surprised. I'm like, how did I not think
So
of this time the way it is, the way it is?
Yeah, so I knew about the Harlem Renaissance. I'm trying to remember, probably as a pretty young girl, because I was such a big reader.
Mhm.
So I would have heard about the poets. So maybe like in high school would probably be the time that I came to know and read the poems, the works of Langston Hughes, or that was the first time I remember hearing um, the words of Nella Larson, or some of them. I didn't know all of them. I knew Gwendolyn Brooks. I didn't know County Cullen until much later, but he was really one of the first ones. And so I knew about the Harlem Renaissance, but I did not know just about the literature side, the literary side of the Harlem Renaissance. I knew about the music. So, I knew about Duke Ellington and Ella Fitzgerald. Those were all the young people of the Harlem Renaissance and the rise of jazz. And
Mhm.
I knew about theater. I knew that some of the very first, I'm a New Yorker who grew up on Broadway, going to Broadway plays. And so I was always very curious about who were the first Black people on there. So I knew about the Harlem Renaissance as a whole cultural movement.
Mhm.
But of course, it would be the literary part of it that would be most interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've noted in the research for this book that you read every issue of The Crisis from 1919 to 1926, just to see what this was all about.
25, yeah. Just
So
to see.
tell us about The
So
Crisis and its
I
origin.
first read that.
Mhm.
So the reason I wanted to read The Crisis was because I wanted to get the language. I think what a lot of people are reacting to when they say they really enjoyed Harlem Rhapsody is because they felt like they really were in the 1920s.
Yes.
And the way that you really feel that it has to do with the fashion and everything, but it has to do more with what people say
Mhm.
and how they speak. And so my thing was to read every issue of The Crisis to get the language. And I did get the language. They didn't call airplanes airplanes. They were called aeroplanes.
Mhm.
They didn't call menus menus. They were called bills of fare. And I saw that through the ads and everything that was in there. But I read every article thinking I was just there to learn the language. What I learned was what was important in their life,
Right.
because the NAACP was an organization that was started in 1909 by more white people than Black people. I think people found that out. They were surprised to find that out in Harlem Rhapsody, too.
Right.
It was people who were fighting for equality. And that was the white people and Black people wanted to fight together for that. And so it became a very powerful organization that not only fought for legislation to be passed in government, but they were very involved in education and just moving the Black cause forward.
Mhm.
And it became the magazine. It was the magazine in the country. It was the only one that featured Black stories, Black artists, Black people. And so for a writer, the only place where you could be published in the 1920s was in the Crisis magazine.
Wow. Well, and then there was the Brownies book. Was that for children? That was for children,
That
right?
was in sure that was for children. I didn't know anything about the Brownies book, and I'm embarrassed about that. That was the idea of W.E.B. Du Bois, who was one of the founders of the NAACP. but he was the founder and the editor of the Crisis magazine.
Mhm.
And some people may or may not know his name, but at that moment in time, Carol, he was the most educated Black person in the country.
Yes.
You can't say that now. You can't find somebody who is the most. But when you think about this time, which was only 50 years after emancipation,
Mhm.
that's crazy to me. 50 years is not that long a time.
Mhm.
And they had just taken the chains off. And here was a man who had his undergraduate degree from Fisk University. When he wanted to get his master's at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, which is where he was from, they didn't accept his classes from Fisk. So he had to get another undergraduate degree, got his master's from the University of Massachusetts, and then went on to get his PhD from Harvard University.
Wow.
He was 50 years after the end of slavery, the most educated Black person in the country. And so he had this magazine out, and he had a vision for his people. And one of the things was that in order for children, Black children, to grow up to believing they could become something,
Mhm.
they needed to see it first on the page. You
Right.
can't be what you don't see.
Right.
And so he had the idea of doing the Brownies book, which was a magazine for, and again, 50 years after the end of slavery, most children, Black children, only saw themselves as ex-slaves,
Mhm.
or their parents or their grandparents were ex-slaves, or they saw themselves as servants.
Mhm.
And he
Right.
wanted to show them that you could be doctors and lawyers and teachers and engineers. You could be whatever you wanted to be. And he did that through the Brownies book.
And that was around for a couple of years, right? That wasn't around as
I
long
was
as.
around for 2 years. I was around for 2 years. He didn't get enough support from the community for it to continue. And, sometimes people say to me, your main characters in a book, if they were to come back, what would they think of today? I think one of the biggest disappointments for W.E.B. Du Bois, who was just this major civil rights figure, I think one of his major disappointments was that there's never been a Black magazine for children
Mhm.
since the Brownies book.
Sure.
For a minute, we had Ebony Jr., but it's never anything that's been sustained.
Very, very interesting. And that's exactly, he wanted to make sure the children realized you too can have a voice. You too can have a place, which was really.
Yes.
So he's not only Jessie's voice, but he's also her lover. Like he's got both. He's doing this as well, and
Yes.
it's kind of interesting in that role, and it gives the story you're telling this a lot of tension because she's realizing
Yeah.
she's the literary editor, but she doesn't want to be the literary editor. She wants to run the whole thing. So there's a relationship that's here, and then there's another relationship that's here. And while the one here is going well for her as being a part of his life as his lover, the one over here where she really wants the editor position is not going as well as she wants it to be. Did that, her being his lover, diminish the way people saw her? Did that, you're only there because of him? Did that hurt?
So the good thing about this novel was that it took place 100 years ago.
Right.
And so I always tell people to read this book with 20th century eyes, not to read it with your 21st century eyes, because I think that would be a question that you would ask today. But back then, women didn't even have careers. So women weren't even thinking about, well, you only got here because of that, and people weren't thinking in terms of that. She was one of the first women to ever have a career. And, women just didn't. They were home. They had a place in 1920. Their place was in the home to be a wife, to raise children. And the reason she was in this affair with him was because she did not want a husband. She
Mm-hmm.
certainly didn't want to be married to him. She knew he would cheat.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't want a husband because she had a love for words. She had a love for literature that superseded any personal relationship she wanted to have. And so that relationship worked out well for them. For 10 years, he was her mentor. They had
Mm-hmm.
never even met. They met when she wrote him a letter in 1903. They didn't meet physically until 1914. And he had been a mentor that helped her get her first internship at Fisk University, that helped her go to La Sorbonne to live in France for 6 months.
Right.
And think about that. That was in 1913 that she went and did that. He encouraged her to go get her master's from the University of Pennsylvania. So he was a person who, her father had just died, and he kind of stepped into that role of guiding her. And then they met in person. And
Right.
everything changed. So that's why their affair to me was also a little different. Like when you have a 10, 11 year mentorship, you have a foundation that's different.
Right.
That most affairs you just meet at a bar or something. But what I tell people about her relationship with W.E.B. Du Bois is that he was an asset for her in the beginning, because he totally created the position of literary editor to get her closer, to get her from Washington, D.C. to New York, to be closer to him. She took what he meant for just to be for their relationship, she took it and turned it into a movement,
Right.
into the Harlem Renaissance. So he was an asset in the beginning, but he became a liability at the end when her goals became higher than his.
Right.
And
Right.
I think he helped her and then he hurt her.
Right. He helped her along because he had all the right connections. He knew who to introduce her to. We're going to get into the conference that he brought her to as well in a little bit. But there were all these kinds of moments that she may never have been able to accomplish on her own. But then it becomes it becomes a different way of weighing your relationship then. Am I weighing it? Am I doing this for this or what's happening? It becomes more contractual or something like that, because why
Yeah,
are we being
yeah,
kind to each other? Why is this? And I feel like in the whole book it's in the back of her head of, I'm still looking for something else and he's giving me this, but I want that, and that's the prize to me, was become the
yeah.
editor, the editor herself.
Yeah, she wanted to be the editor herself. And a lot of people have said to me, why didn't she just leave? And I think that's because, again, they're not looking at it with 20th century eyes. Because leave and do what?
Right.
Her only shot to have a career, she had one shot. And the only shot to have a career as an editor was at the Crisis magazine. And that proved to be true, because when she finally did leave, thinking that this is the perfect time, I know all the founders of the NAACP, I'm internationally acclaimed, I'm the first woman to write this novel about the Black middle class, the first writer ever, Black writer ever, to write a novel about the Black middle class. And she had discovered all of these writers, and she is known as the woman who discovered all of those writers. She's thinking, I have everything in place. I can leave now. I have connections. I don't have to be introduced to someone. These are my connections. And she could not get a job.
Right.
She
Right.
could
And she's
not get
here. She's been published. Her book has done well. She's known internationally. And she goes to the publisher and says, I'd really like to work here. And they're basically, they don't say no right away. They just sort of like cushion it out as being an option. They
they
just are,
couldn't.
it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
And it's not going to
and
happen
one
on
of
my
the
watch.
publishers, yeah, and
It's
not on our watch. And she even came up with what I thought were very creative ideas at the time. She said she would work remotely,
right.
like, she would work at home,
Right.
and so that nobody would see her in the office.
Hmm.
But even with her knowing one of the most powerful, financially powerful men in the country, Joel Sparnham, she could not get a job.
Mm-mm.
And she ended up, and I believe, I don't have a lot to, because I didn't really pursue her life after my book ended, but I wanted to know enough. That's why I put it in the author's notes of
Yes.
what happened to her afterwards. um, I don't believe it was a very happy life, because she
Mm-mm.
was not doing what she wanted to do.
No. Teaching French at a high school in Harlem was not what she had cultured
Was
herself to
not,
do in life. That's not
no.
what she wanted to be. She married later. It was not, it's almost like she, because of the way that everything dropped, she ended up being in the part of history that she didn't plan to be in at all.
She
The
didn't,
part,
yeah.
she could have done that without doing what she did. And it was she still, cultured people along. She was still, but it wasn't with the power. And what she had for so long was the power to create people, the power to whatever. Sure, she could work with people in school, she could work with poets on the side, but it was not the same as that role where you were moving everything forward. Not the
You
same.
know, and not at all. And she only got married because at that point she had no choice. Like in those days, a woman had no agency at all. I mean, I don't want to say forget about the fact that you couldn't vote, but that's the thing that we mostly relate to that time. We say women didn't have the right to vote. Women did not have the right to do anything. So a woman couldn't sign a lease.
Nope.
A woman could not have a bank account in her name.
Right.
That's the part that blows me away. Because I was like, well, what about all these working women? What about the actors? What about, the women that were singers? Well, their manager had to keep their money.
Right.
And so I don't trust anybody like that. I
Until the
can't imagine
60s.
my agent keeping.
Yeah.
I know.
Until the 60s. It was that
Until the
long.
60s.
This was
It
going
wasn't that long.
on.
And it wasn't until the 70s where a woman could get a credit card without the permission of her father or her husband.
Right.
That blows me away. I was alive. How can that be? I was alive.
How is this happening? How is it not revolted against? How is it? I mean, people were marching for
Because I
so
think
many
people,
things, but not,
but I But I
God,
think people get used to what they're used to. Because I always say that the biggest misogynist during that time, as I was looking at Jessie and going through the suffrage movement, the biggest ones were women. Women who didn't feel like women should not be in that kind of position. Women shouldn't do that. We're not capable. We're not like men, because that's what we were taught.
Mhm.
That's what we saw, and that a woman's place should be in the home, that it's up to men to make those decisions. I was reading articles about women who didn't want the right to vote because one woman, a letter she had written in saying, why should I worry my head and learn the difference between a congressman and a
Right.
senator? Why should I have to be concerned about that? We can't imagine that now,
Mm-mm.
but 100 years ago, but I used to say to my father, I could have never been a slave. I would have done this. I would have done that. And he said, no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You're born into a certain place and you just conform.
And you would have had fear. Okay, in slavery, people had fear. They had fear of being owned, they had fear of being hurt, they had fear of being
Yeah.
sold. In her time, she had another kind of fear, is that she would never
Yeah.
get to exercise her dreams. She would never get
Yeah.
to exercise what she wanted to do. And she could do all the shepherding going along. Working with poets, working with writers. But when it came time for her to make the leap she wanted, that was the one that was held back. Whereas she had helped so many people along the way. As
Yeah, and again, I think it's because she was a woman, and
Mhm.
there were so few women. And one of the things I wasn't able to include in Harlem Rhapsody, which I wish I had more pages, but I knew no one would want to read 700 pages of my novel, was that she was very aware that she needed to help the women writers the most.
Mhm.
She
Mhm.
had this awareness that women were going to be erased. And so I did have that in the book, and I ended up taking those out because some of those women's names are not as well known as Langston Hughes and County Cullen and Jean Toomer. But she was very, very focused on what she could do for children and what she could do for women.
Mhm.
And I just believe she just had this knowledge that they're going to try to erase us. And I need to do everything to make sure that didn't happen. And it happened to her.
She was the one. She was the one that bore the brunt. Poetry was such a big part of the literature of the day, something we don't see today. Like people are not constantly walking around talking about the poetry in their lives or whatever. What
Yeah.
is it about poetry that was such a big part of the literary canon at that time? Was it the ability to tell a story in a smart and brisk way? What was, because we don't have it right now, unless I'm missing something again.
Yeah. Well, you know what I think it was? It was the accessibility. And what I mean by that, again, it was 50 years after emancipation. There was a high school graduation rate among Black people of 2%. And
Mhm.
when you think about it being 50 years after emancipation, half of the people alive were ex-slaves. slaves. They were former slaves. So they were not educated. They could not read. And they were learning to read through their children and their grandchildren. And so I believe what poetry did at the time, and I don't have anything to prove this, but this is something that I paid a lot of attention to, because the poets were the big stars. Like, people were buying the Crisis to see what was Langston Hughes' next poet. I believe it was the accessibility. I believe that it was easier for someone who was just learning to read to absorb and comprehend 17 lines versus even 17 pages in a short story. I just believe that that was the easiest way. And then people grew from poetry into other things. Poetry is still pretty big, but I think that's the reason why it's not as big today as it was then, because now people can read entire novels. People can read series of books.
Right. And it's a different thing. It's a different time. It's a different time. And people are looking for opinions, and they're looking for this and that when they go out to read. And right now, the revolution among young people of just all wanting to be influencers, which is so terrifying to me. It is just how many people I know who now this is what they want to be, is an influencer. And I'm like, okay, like, really? This is
I know.
influencing who about what?
I know.
It's very, very scary, because we've taken something where we had moved so far ahead in culture, even like along in the 60s, along the time of what was going on, people, communicating through writing. And now everything is video. Everything is video, stage, performance. It's like everyone has become an actor or an actress. And how many people are following you to make you popular? Whereas before, you knew how many people subscribed to the magazine, but that was about it. And I feel like right now we're kind of off a track, because not everybody's going to continue to be able to be an influencer in their life, but we've missed a bunch of skills along the way that have been abandoned just because that's become the career of choice. Am I crazy?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is this little computer that none of us can get off, that we hold in our hands, because people don't even have to learn how to spell. People don't have to learn how to do anything. It'll fix it for them. Children aren't learning how to write in cursive, all of those things. And one of the things that I think we've really lost is part of my research for any historical book are the letters that people write.
Yes.
And we don't write letters to each other anymore. No. We don't even send cards. I remember when I first got married, I love sending Christmas cards and getting my Christmas card list.
Yes.
And we don't even do that anymore. We've lost so much in communication. And we've gone from written communication, which used to be the major way that people communicated, to oral, and I don't know what you call it, to digital communication.
But it's also very easy to yell there because you don't have a face in front of you. There's so many things that can happen digitally that if you didn't like somebody's poem, you wouldn't be showing it all over your face. You would be trying to sit there and say, what are they saying? Now, by saying somebody's wrong is almost as good as saying somebody is right. Like, sometimes say, look what happened.
Yeah.
The one thing that I was really amused that you wrote about was coded and uncoded paper, knowing that would have been a steep learning curve for Jessie. So remind me, was there cost savings, the way the product looked? And I know you did research on this one.
I did so much research on it. And even in the historical notes, I said, oh my goodness. I have a friend who is also a historical writer, Rashonda Tate, and I called her and asked her, because she works with a newspaper, and it did make sense, because you would think the coded paper costs more than uncoded paper, but it was the uncoded paper that cost more than coded paper. And I asked her to check that 1,000,000 times, and I read all kinds of articles on it. And you know what's so interesting? I don't know. I'm sure Jessie had conversations like that. But like in my other historical novels, these women, and we have to do it today. We have to prove ourselves in those ways. So she had to go to someone who was probably less educated than she was, a white man who may or may not have graduated from high school. She has her master's. She has a degree from a school in Paris, and all of this. And he treats her like she's the help.
Right.
And so she has to go in, because he asks her, even though she shows up in a suit, he asks her, was she there to clean the offices?
Right, right.
And so, but she has to prove herself to him,
You know,
and she does it, and she did it with class.
I did love hearing about the fashion. Fashion was such a big thing. The way the women dressed, dripping in furs, and everyone dressed to go to lunch. Everyone dressed
Yes,
for every single
for
occasion.
everything.
It wasn't just going out for the theater or going out for something black tie. It was, and you did such a great job of describing the fashion because it's always of interest to me and what people were doing. And I tell you, a couple weeks ago, we were in the city and I had a couple of people from my staff in the car, and I said, "Look at everybody. Everybody looks like they're homeless walking around. Nobody."
Yeah, walking around, especially in Manhattan. And those are some of the richest people. They look like they really do.
Nobody is wearing like a nice suit with a tie and a jacket.
Yeah.
It is, if you see one person like that when you're walking on the street, it's surprising. And the way
Well,
people
I
dress
think
compared to then.
yeah, to then, and my parents were kind of, I mean, they weren't of that era, but they were a little left over. I remember being 6 and 7 years old, getting on an airplane,
Mhm.
and my
Oh,
father was in a suit and tie, and we were in dresses with
yes.
our little shoes. And like my grandparents lived in the Virgin Islands, so that my parents at the in some summers we would just get on a plane by ourselves, and we were always always dressed. And I was trying to remember, when did it become so casual for me on an airport and on an
Right.
airplane? Because even in graduate school, when I used to travel around, I would be dressed up because that's how my mother, had us all. And then now I was on an airplane today and we're all in sneakers and leggings. And, and when you see someone in a suit or someone dressed up, you're like, what's wrong with them?
Right.
But yeah, so we've lost all of that,
I can't
all of
understand
that.
like the way that you dress is the way you feel. I mean, it says such a big thing to
Yeah.
me, at least. There are times where we're at the grocery store and I say to my husband, or I'll be going to the grocery store and I said, I don't know if I'm dressed to go. And he goes, think how many will be there in their pajama pants. You're okay. And
Yeah.
the bar has gotten so low
So low.
compared to what it was before. And I'll be in the store sometimes and I'm like, okay, this is a really nice neighborhood. And they're wearing slippers to the store. And
Yeah, they're wearing slippers to the store. Or like you said, your husband's like, look, you're gonna be fine. You took off your pajamas, because I recently saw someone what I thought was a shower cap on an airplane, and they told me it was a bonnet. But still, I just found, wow, my mother would not allow that.
No, no, you wouldn't be. I don't know. There's so much that has changed. And is it the worst thing that happens? No, but there are, I don't know. I'm still into the fashion thing. I spend too much time at Condé Nast. I think about what I'm going to wear. Like if I'm going to speak, I worry about what I'm going to wear
Yeah,
before I worry about what I'm going to speak. Honestly, I try to think about what I'm going to try and project
yeah,
whenever I go
yeah,
to an event, whenever I'm doing something. And I just feel like those times, the way people were dressed, the way WB's wife was dressed was a huge thing. And the other women,
yes,
which also brings me to the white women that were part of the Harlem Renaissance. So let's talk about them because you
yes.
had another group there that I don't know if they were trying to see themselves as liberal or they were just trying to see themselves as embedded in a culture. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was really interesting, right? So one of the most interesting books I read as part of my research was a book called Miss Anne in Harlem, The White Women of the Black Renaissance.
Mhm.
And these were women who had a lot of money. Many of them were widows, but they were very, very wealthy.
Mhm.
And they did not want to spend their time sitting at home and not making a difference. And they felt that Black people had not had they had not had any way, any means of being able to publish or spend any time writing, forget about publishing, writing. And they also felt that Black people were very creative, and all they needed to be able to create these masterpieces was money and time, the two
Mhm.
most important commodities.
Mhm.
And so these women tried to give Black artists money and time. And they were patrons of the arts.
Mhm.
And the one who's in the book, Charlotte, was probably the most well known. She was the one who gave, in today's times, I can't even imagine how much money it was, but millions and millions of dollars to Black artists that we know, Langston Hughes or Neil Hurston, Elaine Locke. And she gave them money so that all they would have to do was write and not worry about money.
Hmm.
And it was such a grand thing to accomplish, right? But
Right.
at the same time, there was a little bit of interesting racial thoughts
Yeah. Us versus
because
you.
Charlotte,
Yeah.
yeah, because Charlotte would say things like, I need you to write this because Black people are so primitive. Your words will be so much better. Or your Black people are closer to the earth. And then she had a really bad breakup with Langston Hughes outside of the timeline of my novel, where she had wanted Langston to write about Africa in more positive terms.
Hmm.
And he's like, I ain't never been to Africa.
Right.
Come on. But there were things that they wanted. And it's such an interesting thing about those women because without them, we wouldn't have many of the novels that the Black artists were able to write in the early parts of the Harlem Renaissance. But with them, it came so many interesting racial issues.
Yes.
And that always shows you that no one is all good, no one is all bad,
There was a feeling of
because
ownership.
their hearts were in the right place.
There was ownership in a different way, in some ways, of I am owning the right to give you time to do your craft. That's what I was
Yes.
seeing there. It was,
And I'm superior to you because I can do this.
right,
And so, since I'm superior, you must listen to what I say. You must write what I say. You must be who I want you to be.
right. And come with me to places so that you can be on my arm and I can shepherd you around the room and look like I am inclusionary in my life. But by the same token, I'm using you. Like it was
Yeah.
a really interesting way to, I was looking at it and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Did not know
And
that.
that book, Miss Anne in Harlem, as I'm a big fiction reader, I don't read, I want to be taken away. But these women, that book is very interesting. I think it was like 5 or 6 women and their stories. And that's where I got everything about Charlotte. Like there was nothing in that book that I made up about Charlotte.
Right.
Nothing. Not her words, not her history with her husband, not her apartment. Everything I got was from historians about Charlotte.
Yeah.
Nothing was made up.
Her and who she was. And your author's note was so interesting. Anybody reading this book, don't skip the author's note because there's so much in there about your research process and also the way you saw people and you were going to use them in the book, the way you were going to construct the story, the way you were going to bring the story to us. Jessie also was a speaker and she spoke at the Pan African Conference and it stirred a lot of people and it upped the way people knew her. And once again, he had brought her with him. He had brought her abroad to go, do this conference and whatever. What was her messaging that made people excited about her? What was it that she talked about freedom, that she talked about the literary word? What was it that
Yeah,
really
I think what it
got it?
was, again, it was that 50 years after emancipation. I mean, that is the theme that I will keep talking about.
Mhm.
And that's what she went there to say. She went there and she said, 50 years after emancipation, I want to show you, world, what Black women have accomplished in America.
Mhm.
And so she talked about, and I loved how she talked about how Black women came, because actually we built slavery. The workforce came from our womb. And
Mhm.
then she talked about just now going through emancipation and what happened with that, and how 50 years after, the number of Black women who were college educated, the number of Black women who had their master's degree. And then at that conference, she introduced the 3 Black women who were PhDs at that time. Think about it. There were only 3 Black women who were PhDs. And so she knew them all, and she was able to show their pictures, and people in Europe were shocked that that was happening in America, that Black women were being educated. And so she was like, so watch out, world, here we come.
Watch out, world, here we come. And it was something that was, immediately got people on her radar about like, oh, look at this woman and look what she did. But also it got me interested is how fast the news traveled from Europe. First of all, they're going to Europe. I mean, at the time, going to Europe was like, and then the fact that the news got back so quickly of the way she was received, I found that interesting as well. Like, were you surprised at the
It was, oh,
international?
I was. But you know what it was that written communication was the way they communicated. And
Hmm.
so mail was delivered several times a day,
Hmm.
things that we're not used to. So the written word spread faster than we ever thought. But she was written up in over 100 newspapers around the world
Wow. Wow.
because the thought of a Black woman from America, because the only thing that America really was known for with their Black citizens was slavery.
Hmm.
And so for the fact that there was a Black woman from America who stood up and actually gave that speech, and then she was talking about educated Black women. We didn't know this was going on. And it was at a Pan African Congress where she was trying to encourage the Black women of that continent.
Hmm.
And all the countries, the 50 something countries, I don't think it was 50 countries then, but however many countries were in Africa, she was trying to let the women of that continent know that if we could do it over here in North America, you can do it there in Africa. And I think it was her message that was just so novel. Like people just could not believe that there was this Black woman speaking and there was this Black woman speaking this way. And that's why the news traveled so fast.
And her too, talking about women as peers instead of I'm just going to bring it. No, no, no. These are other women I know who are in these roles already, and I just want to make it go further. And it was really, really interesting. Um, I also confess to being very amused at the point that she drew the anniversary party for WEB and his wife. I mean, I thought that was
Yeah, and so you read the author's notes. That really happened. I got that from a letter.
You got that from Letter, which was amazing. She throws this major for our listeners and viewers who don't know. In the book, she throws an anniversary party for her lovers and his wife for their a very special anniversary. And she makes sure everything is perfect as they're coming in. And I just thought, I know you got it from her, I think a letter from her daughter or his daughter.
No, WEB wrote a letter to his daughter
Right.
about that party.
Right. And it was almost like, oh, look, if this party happened, nothing else could be happening. Like, I'm just in
Yeah,
love with your mother. There's no other woman, because the woman that you
yeah,
think is the one who threw the party, the one you might be hearing rumors
yeah,
about is one so clever.
yeah,
So, so clever. So
yeah. Exactly. I could. That's why I wanted to put it in the office notes. I couldn't come up with something that smart.
clever. That was, also, she learns later that she wasn't the only lover. She wasn't the only person. She knew, she suspected,
Yeah.
but she found. And it comes from a surprising source. And I'm not going to steal who it is because you really want to read the book to figure this out. How did you come about that story? Did you, whether like lots of
Yeah, how I
what
came,
happened?
I found a letter. I found a letter that he wrote to that woman. And I found a love letter that he wrote to the other woman. And it made me tell my daughter, make sure you burn every letter I've ever written in my life because I just can't believe I had that letter. It was pretty racy.
Yeah.
It was, and I found that out. And so, of course, it did not say they were having an affair in a letter. But when you tell someone to come down to meet you half naked, and I kind of think it's not a business meeting.
No, no, this is not a business conversation. No, it's not. And finding those little nuggets, what made the book so interesting, because you're putting in all these little things where you're there. And I was listening, remember, and I'm like, whoa, whoa,
Yeah,
whoa, 5 more minutes. This is like way too good. I can't turn this part off. And you brought her to life for us as a person. And I also saw the other side, which was the sadness that she didn't get to
yeah,
do everything she wanted. And
yeah,
because the beginning was so powerful in her life and where she was, it made me hurt all the more for her later when
yeah,
she didn't get to do those things. She didn't get to do, she really thought she'd go to a
yeah.
publisher and they'd be happy. And they were happy with
She
her book.
thought so. She had accomplished so much. Yeah,
Her book sold well. She did other things. The books, all her writing was embraced. People loved it. But she was definitely kept in a box. And she was kept in a
yeah,
box by him, and she was kept in a box by her work. People who could further her work in a new direction as well, no matter how much she did for
yeah,
others. Mm, it's really, really
yeah,
good. What I did love is how much she enjoyed speaking French and she enjoyed her time abroad and she went abroad the second time. It was so interesting to see that that was something that was so fulfilling to her, was just to go abroad and
yeah,
have that kind of way of expanding who she was and what she was.
yeah, yeah.
So did you write in order or did you skip around? Like, did you like just put this all down and say, now what do I do?
Yeah, I wrote in order. I did the outline in chronological order. I did the outline that way, and then I wrote in order. Of course, I had to go back and fill in the pieces, fill in missing pieces, but I wrote it in order.
You know what I love too is, and because I've been listening on audio, it's important, is that it's not just chapter 4, it's the date of where we are. So that if you're
Yes,
listening, especially, yes, if you're reading, but if you're listening, you know that you've moved to a different time period. You know where it's a month later or 2 months later. And I find now that since audio has become such an important platform, we really want to think about what we're doing as the chapter openers and chapter titles.
yeah. And so I'm one of the only people that do it with those specific dates. And one of the reasons is because of audio.
Right.
Because if you don't put dates in, people are not going to know. And then I also do it because it helps me when I'm reading to feel like there's movement. It's just another, but that's not something you have to do, but that's something that's a Victoria Christopher Murray technique.
Yeah, and you're sitting there going, okay, what else was happening at that time? Like I can look at it. Okay, here's one thing. They're out and they're having cocktails and she's not drinking because it's prohibition and she doesn't want to have anything happen. So she's having a
Yeah,
glass of juice. Like you'll bring me a glass of,
yeah,
pineapple juice or tomato juice. And that clicked me right into this is prohibition. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't even
yeah,
think about it with all the great music, great fashion, great energy that's going on. It's also the time of prohibition. So you like grounded,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So do you slip in notes? Okay, you sit down and write. Do you write a specific time of the day? Do you get up in the morning and say, this is what I'm going to do?
No,
Or what do you
no, I have a contract, so I write all the time. I mean, this is my this is my full-time job, and I am writing
right? So
all
if
the
you're,
time.
so if you're, let's say you're in a car and you, or someplace and you think of something, do you just make yourself a note to figure out to do later on? Because I'm the biggest note
Yes,
taker going. I mean, just to remind me what
yes,
to do, you know?
yes. I have notes all the time whenever an idea comes up, I do try my best not to lose it.
Mhm.
And so write it down so that I won't ever lose it.
Did you outline this book in advance or haha, Carol, why would I do that?
No, no, no. I had to outline it.
You
I
did.
outlined it. I went through more steps than I normally do, but I did the dates. I knew the dates that I wanted. And so I looked at what was the big things that were happening in her life. And then I looked at what were the big things that were happening in America, if there was anything that overlapped that I would want to include. So yes, I did do an outline, but outlines change.
Right.
But I did definitely do that.
So who sees your manuscript first when you're finished with it? Your agent, your editor? Who sees it first?
Well, when I'm doing a book with my co-author, of course,
Right,
she and I see it first. But my agent, it goes to my agent
right,
first, and
right,
she tears it up. My agent, who used to be an editor, she tears it up. And so Harlem Rhapsody went to her first. Then it went to my co-author because she knows a lot about it and she tore it up.
right.
And then finally my editor.
And were they three separate groups of notes that you then had to compile and say,
three
what am I going to do?
separate groups, three separate groups, but what they didn't send me in different directions. They just had different focuses, not even realizing it. So it was good. It was really good. And
Okay.
I would say the hardest one who really got into the story for me was my co-author.
Mhm.
She gave me the best notes.
Yes, because she's also written with you before and knows what you can do. She knows how far you can
Yeah,
push
I think
yourself as well.
she
Yeah.
knows yeah, and she could push me. So yeah, she gave me the toughest and the most valuable notes.
Yeah. It's funny when you start writing with somebody and they really know that much about you. So was this always
Yeah.
the title? Was this always the title, Harlem Rhapsody?
We didn't have a title at first, and then it was called the Book Muse of Harlem. And we went through, I remember my agent saying to me at one point, Victoria, I don't think we're ever going to have a title for this book. But it went and it included everyone working on it. It was my agent, my editor, the head of sales, the head of publicity, the head of marketing. And it went back and back and forth. And Harlem Rhapsody came up pretty early, but people were concerned it would sound too much like music.
Uh-huh.
And so, but my agent said, as long as we put a cover on the book, of
Yeah.
somebody
Woman.
reading a book.
Right.
Yeah.
And it totally, yeah, I totally got it when I saw it. I was like, okay, this is not a book about music. We totally
Yeah.
understand this. So was this the first cover you saw, or did they play around with the number to get to this?
They played around with it, but it's a painting. So I and we all love it. The name of the artist is on the inside back jacket
Okay.
of the hardcover book. And so that's the galley that you have, but the
Yes.
hardcover book. And I can't remember his name right now.
That's okay.
But it was a painting. It's a painting.
Wow. It just is perfect. It's absolutely when I saw it come in, I was like, wow, that's a perfect cover. You know what it's going to be about. It's about someone with who's a writer. The audiobook is narrated by Robin
Yes.
Miles. And have you had time to listen to her narration? Because she's really good. I loved it. Or
No,
don't you
I
listen to
heard it
her
was
own
very
work?
good. No. Yeah, no, I don't. But no, she's very good. She's very good.
So what's next for you? You're on the road now. You're still touring. You're
Yes, I'm
still
on the road
touring.
and I have an event I have to do in a little while, so I'm going to
Okay.
have to rush off to my event. But what's next for
Yeah.
me is I have a novel coming out. We don't have a title for it yet, but next summer with my co-author. And all I can say right now is that it's about a Black woman and a white woman and the mob.
Okay. That's enough. You heard it here first,
That's
folks.
enough.
Woman, a
That's
white woman,
right. The
and the
Black
mob.
woman and a white woman and the mob.
Okay.
And another true story of a real person.
I love it. I love the way you find these stories and you present them. I'm going to let you go because I know you've got to get ready to go to your event, but thank you so much for taking the time to
Thank you.
do this. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you, Carol, and thank you for having me back.
Yeah. Well, we'll do it again. We'll do it again next summer, same time next summer. Okay.
Same time.
Thanks so
Okay,
much.
thanks
Have
so
a good one.
much.
Okay. Bye bye
Okay, bye
now.
bye.